average debate. You guys did get to some of the core principles of what this motion was about, so good on you guys. We thought that the reason why it became slightly below average was the lack of analysis, and then like to the closing half we started to see some assumptions happening that weren't proven, and I'll explain that to you shortly. So firstly, the rankings are opening opposition first, opening government second, closing government third, and closing opposition fourth, right? Key elements that came up in this debate was this kind of like majority versus minority. It's like how important are journalists to us versus this big threat of what military force actually is, and then like the characterization of military force from the government side, where it is kind of like this soft stance that government took in terms of saying, oh, it's just going to be a TAC team, or like tactical team, and then from the side opposition what we got was more this idea of like the potential for war and the threats of war through that. And then lastly, a very key element is this idea of truth, and then lastly the threat of war. So starting in fourth place, what happened, the reason why we thought like what happened in both of the closing halves was both of you guys ran under the assumption of war being the repercussion. So what we got from Mpho was that when we send in military force, then we have the backlash from the country who took the journalist originally. We have that backlash, and then we have war. Like with your example of Americana, it's like when you fight with fire, then they retaliate. We understood that, but like with a POI, that argument kind of became rebutted because the guy who took the journalist actually acted first. So to say that we don't want full-on war because the journalist is the bad guy, we shouldn't save him because when we send a military force in, we're going to have a war. I think the assumption was too late. The assumption should be the guy who took the journalist wants a reaction. Do you understand how that then became the assumption that you were just saying that, you know, war is going to happen when we have military force? And like you needed to explain that to us a bit more. You started to do this with your argument when you said like, but journalists are vultures. Okay, so economy of words, that is not as palatable as it could be for an adjudicator. Like, some of the adjudicators took offense to that. Some of the other adjudicators felt, well, that was a relevant point because journalists aren't always right, so just work on the way you package. But like, if you had linked those two arguments, they could have potentially been stronger. But your assumption of saying retaliation is going to happen, which caused full-on war, was difficult to buy because of the fact that the one who took the journalist first, he's the bad guy, so maybe he's the one that wanted war. What we did think is that your biased argument, if you had spent more time with that, it could have been stronger. Like in your web speech, you called it the journalists are vultures, but in your member speech, you said when a country goes in to save a journalist, they're biased because they think the country who took it was wrong. So characterize that a bit more by telling us how journalists aren't informed enough. That was the analysis we already got from opening opposition, but like, you were trying to extend on that, and I think if you had prioritized arguments, I would say prioritize that one above that. In comparison to your closing government, your extension that we got was, so you, by having the truth, or by having the vehicle of truth, which is journalists, when we have that, we prevent future wars from happening, because they tell this objective story. So that runs on two assumptions. Firstly, that when we see the picture of war, we are prevented from war. That is a plausible idea. You needed to prove to me how it is that big macho countries who want something are going to be deterred. Like, you answer that by going, so the American people saw how many people were being killed in Afghanistan by American soldiers. We as the people don't want that anymore. We're not going to vote the guys who send troops out. We're not going to vote them into parliament anymore. Do you understand how your assumption was right? You need to prove it. Otherwise it stays an assumption. The second part of your assumption was that these video cameras are objective. Okay? So like the story is told objectively. You made snide comments here and there where you said, well, I've never heard of an Eastern news station. Well, maybe the reason why you've never heard of an Eastern news station is because you are dominated by the Western narrative. So it's just, yeah, no, I'm not trying to be rude. Like, that was a valid argument to make. It's like, the West, then rather just go, take the hard stance and be like, the West is in the best position to tell the whole truth because we've had these years of democracy and we're so nice, we're so wonderful. Okay, so like, assumptions, good assumptions to make, but when you don't explain them to me, then they stay assumptions. But you outweighed that argument is because like, again, prioritization of arguments. So it's like, we understood the bulk of your matter more in the whip speech when it started to show with this idea of like, and I think had you prioritized this as your extension as well, it could have been quite strong, is this idea, we've moved away from this one country versus another country. It's rather a sect, or like whatever, the Taliban, that take this person and torture him, extending on what your opening was saying is like, this is a human life that is being harmed by one group. And like, it's a group inside a country. That country won't retaliate when they're not liable for that person. You understand, like, you guys say good stuff, but realize that you're saying it, okay? And assumptions don't that. But like, so just quickly, sorry, I'm going off point, but like, outweighing is like, that assumption was just more plausible. In terms of going, how is it that we protect truth and how is it that we prevent war? Like, we thought that they answered it a bit stronger than what you were doing, what that was running under the assumption that we would have full-out war from closing opposition. Okay, we essentially thought that this was an opening half debate. I'm not nervous, my throat is just sore. John Mark said I look like a pussy, but it's not. I just want to cough quickly. Okay, so opening government versus opening opposition. Like, we had quite an interesting discussion here with the two of you being quite close. So both Prime Minister and Leader of Opposition had really strong material. So in terms of opening government, we like this characterization of how it is that journalists are so important, and you prove that to us because they bring us the truth. And that is why it is justified to use military action. So like, you saw that military action is a big deal, and why it is okay, even if we just go save one person, is because they're telling everybody's story, and then we get all of these benefits under that. Directly clashing preemptively, what closing opposition was saying is that, why military action? Why is it that it's okay to go in guns blazing? Like, you answered that preemptively, so well done it there. Just something, it was one of your last points, Isabel, that was also quite strong, was this idea of like, if we don't protect our journalists, it's a harsh environment to be in, and then you deter journalists from going in there. Like, that was a really good argument. So that was this idea of why military interaction is justified, and why it is that we need to protect them in the first place. But this directly clashing with Chris's first point of like, okay, my darling, but like, just message me if you want anything else, or and send me a compliment as well. Okay, so like what Chris was saying in terms of this, like, journalists just do what they want. So your version of truth, that was like, that then became blurred when he says, but journalists don't always tell the truth. So why is it that we want to have this harsh repercussion or this harsh action of military action for something that we don't have like concrete proof that it's going to be the truth? Okay, so then we needed from the deputy, who isn't listening to me, the deputy prime minister, like, to engage with that, because like your strongest matter was attacked there and like broken down because journalists do what they want, and like you had nice analysis in terms of how journalists aren't educated, they don't have a law book that they follow or a rule book that they follow, so like there's no way that we can ensure that journalists are going to give us the truth, which rebuts your argument in terms of, you know, we need to preserve truth, that's why it's okay, but we don't have the guarantee of that truth. Secondly, what we got from opening government was this, it's an individual, we should protect him, okay? We should protect him anyway and whatever. Like, then it becomes difficult to swallow that it's military action. Like, if we have the harm of a potential war, that we then, like, again, rebutting that argument. Like, strong arguments, it was just that they were rebutted from opening opposition side with this idea that when you have a shit journalist that didn't tell the truth, and now people are taking him in because he's spreading lies potentially about our country, and you come in with guns blazing, not with diplomacy like Chris proposed, then unfortunately you have the potential for a catalyst for war, proving that link of how it is that we could potentially have war. So that is why it was contentious, and that's why you guys placed above them. Just quickly here, in between second and third, I just quickly want to do, it's like, so it was that assumption thing, but secondly, like you guys spent a lot, like especially essay, you spent a lot of your time characterizing truth for me again, and why truth is important. That was already done by your opening. And like even you said, is like, opening said this, you never told me why you're different. You weren't different, but like you need to, if you're going to do that, do a whole different spin on it, because you have seen this. You saw that the flaw was that she can't prove that the truth is the truth. Then use that to go like, well, the West, or whatever, the Al Jazeera, who is totally unbiased, like tell us why news is so objective in and of itself, regardless of which country it comes from. So just like try and listen what happens in your opening as well. Okay, personal feedback, you can come with me or anyone else. Okay?
I heard you umming to the door. Umming? Did I no, when you speak, it's a crutch word. It's a crutch word. It's like umming through the door. Did I say it a lot? Or I said it to her. It's such a lame word to have as a crutch word. Oh.
Well, my crutch word was fuck, so I think it's fine.
There's a guy, I think it's David, or someone who's like thinking he's like, more overhaul.
Oh, it's Chris. Chris Hogan.
More